Okay, so it's 1 o'clock. Actually, it's 1:01. Thank you, everybody. For those of us who've been here the previous sessions, thank you. For those who are jumping in right now, thank you too. Thank you on behalf of Citizens Greener Evanston, and thank you on behalf of the Evanston Public Library, the Climate Resilience Community. Today, right now, this is the last event of 17 for the Climate Resilience Community, so it's kind of bittersweet but liberating to let go of this series, but we will come back with more as soon as we gather enough energy to take on this interesting and important topic, which is climate resiliency. Okay, and now we have Ann Nicklin. We're very happy to have her. I'm going to introduce her first because I think it's important to see what we have in the community, an amazing asset. So Anne is a licensed architect who has worked extensively in construction as the former executive director of the Building Materials Reuse Association, BMRA, a classroom trainer and de facto workforce director for the BMRA, a graduate course instructor at University of Illinois at Chicago, and a volunteer with Girls for Science. Two core principles have guided her career: a commitment to buildings that are good for the community and a love for teaching. Over the last 20 years, she has developed into a committed activist for the circular economy, finding ways to teach what she knows and consistently working with different populations and media to communicate the opportunities of deconstruction and reuse. She has a decade each of nonprofit program, administrative and fundraising experience, and residential and commercial building expertise, working with a wide variety of contractors and managing complex building projects. So we welcome you, and thank you so much for being here. And we're super excited to learn more about deconstruction and the Evanston Rebuilding Warehouse. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, Bayan. I'm seeing a little bit of activity on the chat. Yeah, Sylvia, you should come by. You should stop by the warehouse. It's really cool.
By the way, just everybody remember to please put the questions in the Q&A. Those will be read first, and any other comment, the chat is great. Thanks.
Okay. So as Bea said, I am the Director of Workforce Training and Deconstruction Services at the Evanston Rebuilding Warehouse. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Can I share my screen to do a PowerPoint or no? And I am like, you know, semi-Zoom expertise. We've been working in person since about this time last year. So my Zoom skills, I think, have grown along with everybody else's, but I'm not quite at like master's level Zoom of screen sharing and such. All right, there we go. So let me share that and let me make it big. Yes. Oh. You guys are seeing the wrong screen now. Like I said, not quite master's level. Let me switch to the other screen. There we go. Okay, do we have success? No, not yet.
I see the smaller, though. Yeah, I see the small version, but at least in my monitor, it's big enough. But yeah, if you can.
I shared the bigger one now.
Okay.
Are you seeing the presenter notes or are you seeing?
Now I'm seeing you. Now it just jumped. Now I see the big, yeah, now it's great. I guess it was a time.
Good. Thank you all for your patience. Thank you guys all so much for being here. I think this is a phenomenal series and we're really excited to be part of it. And it sounds like it's continuing tomorrow. So very much looking forward to it. When I first started here, I actually presented to Citizens Greener Evanston at a bar on Davis that I can't remember the name of. But so that was we were talking about carbon at that point. So this time I'm going to talk about deconstruction. But first I want to talk a little bit about what the warehouse is. So the warehouse, Evanston Rebuilding Warehouse, we've been around for, we're just coming up on our 10-year anniversary. Originally founded by Lou Dixon, a local community activist and builder. She's phenomenal. She started the organization in 2000. I want to say she incorporated in 2010 and the doors opened, I believe, in 2011. First in one location on Dempster, then a second location on Dempster. And now we've expanded finally to Hartree Avenue, just around the corner from Dempster. We offer education and workshops. Right now, there are things like this, right? But we're hoping to eventually be back in person again soon one day. We'll all be distanced and ventilated. We operate the warehouse. The warehouse has been open. We opened the doors of this warehouse on Hartree in October of 2020. It was designed by the amazing Sylvia Wooler of Remake Architecture. I almost called it Rehouse. That's a salvage store in Rochester. So Remake Architecture. It's an amazing building. Please come stop by. We are open Monday through Saturday, 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. We have 28,000 square feet of donated building materials. And it is really pretty spectacular in all honesty. And we're still finishing it out. We're still meeting the vision that's in the drawings, but slowly but surely we're getting there. One thing I also want to mention is the walls. I'll show you guys a short video kind of at the end of the day. The walls that are going up today is for a space that's actually the Lou and Pete Dixon Community Hub. So Lou and her husband, Pete, were really just extraordinary in launching this organization and kind of putting their full faith and their full efforts in particular behind it. And so the Community Hub in front, it's neat. The space kind of came out of a meeting that our executive director, Ina Gutierrez, went to a few years ago. And she was in a meeting, you know, up in is it the Parasol room at the Civic Center that we've all been to so many meetings in? And she realized it was a meeting of all these kind of different environmental groups in Evanston. And she realized she was the only one who had staffing and space, and that a lot of folks are kind of doing all this work, this extraordinary work in Evanston of putting forth climate resiliency, of putting forth, you know, really meaningful change to how the city operates and how we all build our future. And that we need to share the resources that we have. So the Community Hub, and it's the first thing you see when you walk in the door. The Community Hub is a space that we want to make available to local community groups, free of charge. So for folks that are sharing the same mission that we're sharing, which I think everybody on this call shares, we recognize the need for space and the need for space that was dedicated to reuse, that was dedicated to diversion, that was dedicated to a circular economy. So please come visit the space. It's easy to find. It's the big purple building on Hartree, just around the corner from Erie, which had just opened up their vaccinations to, I think, everybody. So I just got that link like 10 minutes ago. So the warehouse, that's what most people are familiar with. We reuse everything. This is a shot of what the warehouse used to look like before my team deconstructed it. I think a lot of times when we talk about deconstruction, the systematic dismantling of materials, we think about residential homes, right? We think about, you know, kind of the Lincoln log house or the Tinker Toy house that comes apart in bits and pieces. But we've had opportunities, especially with this project, to do a lot more commercial deconstruction. So you can see on the left-hand side, this is what our space on Hartree used to look like. This is literally exactly where like our checkout is. This is our main entry. It used to be a company that rewound off-cast tape to sell to dollar stores. So they would take like the rejects from 3M and they would turn them into dollar store rolls of tape. And they had been there for about 30 years. It was called Tape Ops. And they had, you know, just a big building full of 40-year-old carpet and 40-year-old ceiling tiles and drop ceiling tiles and all this good fun stuff. And we came in with my crew on the right-hand picture there. You can see my crew. That's Omar and Donnie and Mario, and the electrician Dan Corcoran working behind there, and a few other folks. And what they're doing is actually installing those ceiling tiles. We harvested all of those ceiling tiles. There's about 24,000 square feet of ceiling tiles that we harvested, and we use them for wall insulation. So all of the walls that you see in the warehouse right now, all of the new walls, they are all filled with 2x4 fiberglass ceiling tiles. And it's really like, honestly, I've been doing reuse for probably almost 15 years now. I first got really passionate about it in 2007. This is, I think, the coolest reuse I've ever done. And nobody will ever see it. It's invisible, it's behind the walls, but it's one of those materials, it's one of the ugly materials, right? When we think about reuse, we think about stained glass, we think about the beautiful things, about brass doorknobs and things that you want to touch. But this reuse, I mean, these were fiberglass panels. My team was deeply, deeply furious with me for handling fiberglass panels for more than 2 months last year, because you just get scratchy. But it was really amazing, and it saved a huge amount of money for us. I mean, we're well into a few $1,000s that we saved on soundproofing insulation, but more than that, it was on our mission. So we were able to really limit what came off of this site that felt like there was nothing here for us, right? It was a space, but it felt like it was carpet and it was these desks. And what are we going to do with all of this? So it's been phenomenal to give us that opportunity. As I mentioned, I'm not just the director of deconstruction, I'm also the director of workforce training. This is my workforce training crew. They do all the deconstruction that we do. All of our deconstruction is used as a social enterprise to provide jobs while folks are reducing their barriers and preparing themselves to enter into the building trades. So people are with us for 5 months. All of them have barriers to entry in one way or another. Not everybody has a criminal background. Probably historically, about 50% of the folks who have completed our program do have a background with the judicial system, and about 50% are Evanston residents historically. That's beginning to change. We recently merged with the Rebuilding Exchange downtown. Look for announcements coming up. But we are now running a workforce training program here in Evanston that does deconstruction, as well as a workforce training program in Chicago that does warehousing. But yeah, all of the deconstruction that I'm going to be talking about today, all of it was completed by my workforce training crew. The neat picture on the right-hand side, that's my workforce training crew at the Hoover Mansion. A lot of folks might have seen a great deal of publicity last year about the Hoover Mansion in Glencoe. So this is on the north side of Glencoe, just shy of Lake Cook Road. And this was built by the folks who did the Hoover vacuum cleaners. So way back in the day, I think it was built in the 20s. They built really a very beautiful estate. So it's a Tudor style mansion, another Tudor style carriage house, and then the stable building is like beyond belief gorgeous. But a developer bought it, and it's interesting because what they did is bought this very large property. I can't remember how many acres it is, but they're actually going to be taking down these buildings and putting up 22 single family homes, which is sort of a remarkable thing, right? On the one hand, we want to do preservation. On the one hand, we want to do reuse, but as we look at the North Shore and as we look at the opportunities available to folks, getting greater density is not a terrible thing. It's hopeful that as we provide smaller single family homes, that it might be more realistic for folks to stay here and to build their families here and build their careers here. So it was kind of a neat building. We weren't able to deconstruct the entirety of it. It didn't fit with the developer's schedule. But we got hired actually by another local architect. Reuse is full of passionate architects. So a guy named Chris Enck, who's a neat guy, and he sits on the landscape preservation committee over in the village of Winnetka. He shops with us all the time, and he does a lot of renovations. He actually moved, some people might remember the Frank Lloyd Wright house that was parked in the Whole Foods parking lot. He was the guy who moved that. Anyway, he hired us to take down a porch. And so that's my team after a day of removing this kind of like Hansel and Gretel porch from the old Hoover Mansion that he was going to then install on a building down in Champaign, I believe. So it's pretty neat. A little bit about our workforce training program. Really, it is very much what I'm about. It's a lot of what our organization is about. At the end of the day, it's about building up opportunities, not just for workforce participation, but also one of the best ways that we can spread the opportunities that sustainability provides is by giving people the tools to access them, but also by, realistically teaching folks about reuse, about recycling, about resource conservation, also by spreading good information about things like lead paint. On Monday, my workforce training crew is going through the EPA's lead paint training program. And from a public health perspective, I can't think of a better training for them to have. They're in forklift training today, and that's great for getting a job, but it doesn't really do a lot for your community. Lead paint training and learning what a public health risk it actually poses, that can really change things for everybody when you go back to your community and you start to manage your resources. All right, so now the goods. That's kind of the basic bits about the warehouse. And I will confess, I'm not looking at the Q&A at all right now. I can't actually see it on my screen. So if there's anything that's coming up that's pertinent, Bea, just give me a shout.
Not yet, thank you.
Okay. So deconstruction is basically, it's what demolition used to be. So if you go back in the day and you start to look pre-1930, all building removal was pretty much deconstruction. It was called dismantling. There was an entire union around it. And when people talk about crowbars and stuff, sometimes somebody will call them a wrecker's bar, because in a lot of places it was called the wreckers union. And so wreckers bars are actually the tools for taking apart buildings in order to save the materials, because at a certain point, why throw away the materials? It really changed around the 30s for two big reasons. The first reason was hydraulics. Hydraulics are a fascinating piece of technology that allows for energy to be conserved while it is distributed. I could have a much longer conversation about hydraulics and how kind of fascinating they are from a physics perspective. But basically what hydraulics did is they allowed us to crunch up a building into very tiny pieces without a lot of energy. So if you walk around and you start to look at backhoes, or you start to look at the big kind of grabbing machines and those sorts of things, it seems like a tiny piece, hydraulics, but hydraulics really radically changed how we build buildings, how cranes operate, all of these pieces. And it allowed us to crunch up buildings into very tiny pieces, which frankly, we hadn't had the way to harness the energy for that before. So hydraulics is one big piece. And then the second piece is actually World War II. So World War II, with having both theaters open in the campaign, in particular, looking at the Pacific theater of the campaign, and I apologize for any background noise, we do have an install today. During the Pacific theater of World War II, there was a lot of land clearing. There was a lot of setting up of individual Navy bases on little islands, of coming in and creating an airstrip where there had previously been a jungle. And all of that was done by a division of the military called the Seabees. So Seabees. The Seabees. Basically what the Seabees did is they worked with Caterpillar, the manufacturer Caterpillar down in Peoria, and they learned how to use bulldozers to extraordinary effect. So bulldozers also using that hydraulic pressure technology. They could come in, and what they would do is they would take two bulldozers, right? And they would spread a chain between the two bulldozers. So the two bulldozers are, 100 feet apart. There's a chain between them, and they would just drive forward and clear all the trees and clear all the land. And they would create an airfield in like 5 days. So depending on who you ask, and I am deeply not a military person, so I don't really know the answers to this, but there are a lot of folks who credit that land clearing in the Seabees with having a pretty significant impact on the war. And what happened is all those Seabees got trained, and they got trained in how to use bulldozers, and they got trained in how to clear spaces very, very quickly. And they came back to the States. And so it's a military transfer of technology. They came back to the States. Caterpillar directly targeted them, providing very low interest loans, so that all of those folks who had been trained in the military on how to remove items and clear land, they then got very low interest loans in order to purchase the equipment from Caterpillar. And they all started up demo companies. They all started up land clearing companies. So it's kind of a fascinating thing. The politics behind all of it is really quite fascinating. And then you combine it with urban renewal projects. Urban renewal actually required that you had to remove existing buildings in order to receive the federal funds for urban renewal. So again, the second long conversation I would love to get into if anybody wants to talk about the politics behind demolition and why it exists. But deconstruction, I'd say what we're doing is not just preserving materials, we're also preserving a trade that, people took apart castles in order to save the materials. We're doing it at a much more lightweight scale, in all honesty. So our deconstruction, we do both structural deconstruction, we do complete deconstruction, we do non-structural deconstruction. The pictures shown here are from a building in Highland Park. The guy who actually founded the Ravinia neighborhood lived in this building for a time. It was built in, I want to say 1888. It's in the Ravinia neighborhood of Highland Park. Beautiful home. Family had owned it for the last 30 years and had gone through various kind of renovation exercises, but hit a point. And I think, if we have North Shore residents on the call, hit a point where actually the permit fees were what ultimately stopped the project. They hit a point where the permits alone would be like $75,000 to renovate and preserve this building. Never mind the construction costs. And so the owner made the decision that, and it was, she was pretty heartbroken about it, about taking down the house. She made the decision that she needed to take down the house, but that she couldn't bear to demolish it. That this had been where she had raised her kids. This has been a home that I think it had like 4 owners total, over more than 100 years. And she felt like her role in the stewardship, she wasn't the original builder of the home, but that her role in the stewardship of this property and this home was to ensure that there was another life for the materials. So it was pretty cool. We got to take it all down. We put scaffolding up around the side so that we could take down the roof. There was a lot of structural instability. There had been a number of fires throughout the years, 2 fires that we knew about, and then a few others that we uncovered evidence of. So there'd been a number of fires, and so we put up kind of safe materials, allowing our team to take it down from the outside and then work towards the inside. And, basically the principle that we follow with deconstruction is an acronym called LOFO. It's sort of like YOLO, but very different. We just follow the principle of last on, first off. So when we're looking at simple structural systems, like this is a balloon frame, wood frame house. It's called balloon frame because the outside studs travel the entire 2-story distance, rather than contemporary buildings have something called platform framing, where the outside studs will go 1 floor and then there will be a platform, and then the 2nd floor studs will go to the 2nd floor. This is balloon framed, and so they did the entire outer shell all at once. It's very typical of this time, both because it happened right around the time of the Chicago fire, and balloon framing is often credited with kind of emerging during that time because it allowed very quick construction. Also because this is timber that was harvested from the Great North Woods. This is old growth, first growth timber. Old growth just means that it was basically harvested prior to about 1910 is usually what most people think. But mainly that these are trees that were harvested for the very first time on land that was harvested for the very first time. In contrast, if you go to buy a 2x4 at Home Depot right now, you're probably talking about land that has been harvested at a minimum every 7 years for the last 100 years. And it's most likely going to be from Oregon or Georgia. That's really where we get our lumber from at this point. Oregon's the largest lumber producer in the country right now. Georgia is also a huge lumber producer. There's a few other states that contribute. But all of this house that was built in the 19th century, this is all Great North Woods. So this is northern Minnesota, this is Wisconsin, this is Michigan. That is where all of this lumber came from. And it is a unique and nearly extinct material. You really can't harvest it anymore unless you found a national park and harvested there. But certainly anything that was anywhere near either a lake or a river was harvested and came through Chicago. Chicago was the nexus for all lumber. About half of that lumber then traveled on to the west and was primarily used for fence building. And about half of that lumber stayed here and rebuilt after the Chicago fire, built up the entirety of the North Shore of everywhere that's happening in Northern Illinois, probably all the way down to St. Louis. If anybody's really interested in the movement of materials, particularly around that time, there's a book called Nature's Metropolis by William Cronin that is extraordinary. And their lumber chapter is like, it's the coolest thing in the world to read if you have lumber interests. If you'd like to know more about kind of the history of this region and how lumber shaped us. In any case, the deconstruction on this project, we had the balloon framing. We took it all apart piece by piece. This was 2 different cohorts of trainees that I had on this project. Every bit came apart by hand. It was built by hand. It was taken apart by hand. There was no construction adhesive. There was no glue. There was a little bit of asbestos protecting the electrical panels that were installed. It was first built with gas throughout the building. We found the old gas lines and the old gas fixtures. They added electrification later. They did do a small addition with a porch at one point, and they rebuilt the roof a few times. When we took off the roof on this project, I thought that it was going to have about 3 or 4 layers, which is actually considered kind of heavy. It actually had 7 layers of roof. It was a bit of a nightmare. We burned through a lot of Sawzall blades, cutting through all that asphalt shingling. Asphalt shingling is just, kind of the worst stuff in the world. And then finally, when we got down to the chimney and to the foundation, we called in some of our friends from the demo field from, in this case, Pappas Demolition based out of Glenview. And what they did is they basically knocked everything loose for us so that we could come back in like ants and palletize all the bricks. So there was no concrete on this project, which is extremely unusual for really any house that's still standing at this point, and really lovely. I think there's probably a lot of people on this call who have read the IPCC report, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And if you've read that report, you know that concrete is what's going to do us in. Concrete will take us all out. It is the #1 source of emissions. It always bums me out. But so this was a project with no concrete on it, which is rare and makes me incredibly happy. And we were able to salvage just about everything on this project. So I know one of the things that I'm supposed to talk about today is what can be reused, what can be recycled, what needs to go into the landfill. So on this project, every single bit of wood was reused, even the burned pieces. There are a lot of folks who like that kind of Japanese traditional burned piece. And though my warehouse manager thought I was crazy, I did bring all the burned pieces back to the warehouse as well. My team was covered in soot for a few weeks there. We had a lot of baby wipes. People would come back with just completely covered in soot. They looked like miners. So we saved every bit of structural wood. The outside siding is actually a fir, like a softwood fir. It was painted, so we didn't bring it back to our warehouse, but the owner actually kept it. She is now based at a farm near the Quad Cities, and so she was able to use it for her project. She brought up her trailer and took all the wood. It was beautiful, clear fir. It was gorgeous siding. So she took all of that. The windows, we took all of those down to our now partners and then just our friends at the Rebuilding Exchange. They took all of the single glazed windows. I think a lot of people use them for like kind of greenhouses and decorative pieces and prop sets and that sort of thing. In general, windows are, they are very easy to keep installed. They are very difficult to reuse. The sizes and those kinds of things make it really challenging, and particularly the windows with newer technology, like a vinyl window. It's not going to last very long, and it's not going to go into the reuse market. So we were able to reuse all the windows, all the railings. We saved actually a lot of landscaping on this project. We were able to save, of the bricks that came out, the building had been, the sump pump had been cut really early. And so actually the entire time that we worked on this building, there was about 4 feet of standing water in the basement. So that, combined with the fact that they were about 100 years old, had really damaged the bricks. So we were probably able to save about 30% of the bricks. The remainder of the bricks were crushed and used for road stabilization. So in the kind of demo world, they build a lot of roads in landfills, and they need to stabilize them. And so they specifically, we made them, specifically use our bricks, not just for general fill, but to actually target it. So all of the bricks went towards, highest and best reuse. And then at the end of the day, we used MBL Recycling, who were based out of Palatine. They were acquired last year, which was a real bummer, because they were an amazing company and I think had the best recycling program in the region for waste handlers. So we used their mixed recycling. And I would say that in total, we had 4 dumpsters on this project, which is actually rather remarkable. We got very lucky in that the plaster had been removed before we started this project. Had there been plaster, we would have had more dumpsters. There's really nothing we can do with plaster. But because they had already removed all the plaster, we got lucky and we had a pretty nice project on this. It's now a green site. We actually get pulled in now for a lot of projects. We've done about 3 or 4 projects where people remove homes and then turn them into permanent green sites. And this was the first one that I had worked on. But we're now working on, I think, our 4th that will be going to a green site. So it's an interesting, it's always trying to figure out how do we balance affordable housing and presence of housing versus open space and all those good things. This project is one that we're actually waiting to start work on. This is a project in Winnetka. It's a fascinating house. It was built in the 50s. It's been a single owner. The folks who commissioned and built this house very much to their specifications, worked with a local architect. They lived there for the remainder of their lives. They raised their kids there. They lived there. And just recently, when the final owner passed away, her children sold it to their neighbor, who again is looking to create open space. It's funny to be in this spot. For reuse and for deconstruction, we often stand in, not conflicted and not against one another, but in complicated conversations with historic preservation. I'm an architect by training. I love buildings. I don't want to take buildings down. That is not my goal. I don't walk around being like, and I want to take that one down and that one down. But the reality is that often buildings come down. That it just happens quite frequently because buildings, and particularly homes, are so particular to the owner, and particularly when you have something that is very different than every other building like it. It both makes it really important for preservation, but it also makes it really unlikely that anybody else is going to live there. And so this is a unique building. You can see the plans on the left. That's kind of my poor scan of the plans. It's, I think, a scan of a scan of a scan of a original hand drawing that was shared with me. So on the top, it's a building section, which is looking straight at the building as though a slice has been cut through it, like you would slice through a cake and then see the layers. And then on the bottom is the floor plan. And so the place where I took that picture, I'm trying to look at the gas line. It's an unusual corner for me to be standing at. But I think I was standing right outside of the study, which is right by the north arrow on the plan. It's a really cool site. It's over on the west side of Winnetka. It's got cool access to the kind of the lagoons over there. It's totally wooded. It's, I think, the only site that I've ever been on in the North Shore that has like literally zero applied landscaping. You know, the land was cleared at some point, so it was landscaped, but it is very much wild seeded, and intentionally wild seeded. It has little walking paths through the area. It's really probably about an acre of land, but it feels very enclosed. It feels very private. And then it was built, it's something apparently called a Jamaica style house. It's a name I had been unfamiliar with, but it's a very indoor outdoor house. It has got a lot of visual connection to the outdoors. It's built with microlam beams, those big arches. And it's unlike anything we've ever taken down before. And it remains to be seen whether or not the village is going to give us permission to take it down. The village is also trying to figure out how do you maintain the feel of your village, right? I think on the North Shore, certainly in Evanston, definitely Winnetka, definitely in Glencoe, there's a lot of debate. In Highland Park, Lake Forest, I mean, I've been on all of these panels. There's a lot of debate. How do we take this really unique community that we have and recognize and respect the design resources that make that feel the way that it feels? You know, it's kind of like the Thomas Kinkade. Does anybody still remember the Thomas Kinkade paintings? I'm sure people do, right? So he was this painter, and he painted these kind of not fairy tale paintings. He painted these, you know, just very kind of affectionate, imagined realities of a very cozy village. And he was, I think, like the highest selling painter ever. It was crazy. He passed away like 15 years ago, but he was a multimillionaire and had stores in the mall selling paintings of idealized towns. People loved them. And so I think that when we kind of look, especially at Evanston, at communities like this, there's a lot to be said for our built reality and how that shapes the way that we feel about our community. And there's a lot of pushback against folks going against lot lines, about building kind of big boxy things that don't feel like us, whatever us is. And that's one of the questions with Esau's. This is a very unique house. I've never seen anything else quite like it. And there's not really anything else quite like it out there. Like most towns, Winnetka only has the power to delay things. That's what most folks have, is a demolition delay. So it's a cool house. I've got a little bit of a video that I can show you later of me walking through it so you can see some pieces of it. And from a deconstruction perspective, it's really interesting. It was built intentionally by the architect as kind of a purity of materials. It uses concrete, but it's a pebbled concrete, so that it will intentionally feel like a more natural surface rather than, you know, I think a lot of times we look at industrial spaces and they have polished concrete, which can feel really clean and cool, but you don't really find polished concrete in the world, right? It doesn't really exist. And so here they used a pebbled concrete to try and replicate a natural stone. They used a lot of brick, and then they used cedar and wood, and that's it. The shingles were originally wood cedar shingles. One of the kind of pagoda-like structures still has the original wood shingles. The other one has been replaced with asphalt shingles. And so it's very simple in its materials. It's very simple in its layout. It has, you know, of all the walls that are in there, probably only about 10% of them are drywall. And it has courtyards in the middle of it, giant atrium courtyards. There's actually a tree, a bay tree, I believe, growing to about 20 feet tall in one of them that we weren't able to remove because it's like 20 feet tall. And the ceilings inside are actually quite short near the doors. So we're trying to figure out how it will come apart. It's going to be a bit of a trick, but it'll be nice because I think, once again, when you get these houses that were built by hand, in all honesty, they come apart by hand. And there is a lot of clear dedication to the structure. In contrast, when we've taken apart houses that are newer, when we take apart houses that you can't see any of the structure, there's frankly a lot of waste when people glue down floors and glue on walls and those kinds of things. On this project, our main waste will probably be the windows. These are all aluminum frame windows from the 50s, which unfortunately there's not a great market for. If there were a market for these windows, we would save them in a heartbeat. It's not that we can't save them, it's that nobody will buy them and reuse them. So we are always limited in our reuse by what somebody will actually turn around and reuse. Otherwise, we'll turn into the landfill, but we'll be a well-organized landfill as opposed to the disorganized landfill that accepts trucks full of stuff. The asphalt shingles will be wasted. I saw actually that a couple of our friends from Collective Resource are here. I really want to have a conversation about composting these shingles because I think it could be so cool if we can get the metal out of them. We often have a lot of wood waste, and I feel like there's a compost solution that we can explore there. But all the wood, all the brick, everything else we're going to save. The concrete we won't be able to because concrete, unless it's like individual pavers, it can be done at a larger scale. I've seen really interesting projects, particularly there's a great project in Berlin that the project came about right after they took down the wall, and they actually cut sections of some of the post-war East Germany buildings. They cut like kind of, square sections of the walls, and they used them to make new townhouses. It was pretty wild. So it can be done, but you got to be super creative. And so since we are on the supply side rather than the demand side, the concrete will likely be crushed and recycled. But we're going to see very, very little landfill on this project. I'd say we're probably going to be looking at the 5% to the landfill, if that, on this project, because there are so few poor materials on here. Poor materials always go to the landfill. Asphalt always goes to the landfill. Anything that's petroleum based, like plastics, those sorts of things, they always go to the landfill. So, I mean, it's the classic garbage in, garbage out, right? Deconstruction, we do selective partial. This is a small project in Lake Bluff where we were taking out all of the kitchen. So granite, obviously there's no such thing as new granite. All granite is just being reused from one location or another. So granite, we always save. This granite I thought was really pretty, but it took a long time to sell. So we save all of that. We save all of the cabinets. Appliances are actually our #1 seller. People buy more appliances from us than anything else. So we saved all of that. We saved all the light fixtures here. It was a neat little project. It was a family that was growing, and they just they needed things to work. They needed things to work the way they needed them to work. But it was a cool little project. We can do a lot of deconstructions in a day or two. Typically what happens for us is that we'll have one large project, and then we'll also have a bunch of small projects that we take along the way. So depending on the size of my crew can be anywhere from 4 to 8 people at a given time, depending on who's graduating and who's arriving. So we'll typically spend a lot of our time at whatever our large project is, and then we'll just kind of add on beyond that and come and do 1 and 2 day projects. So this week, my crew just took out a kitchen in Orland Park this week. Next week, we might be taking out flooring. The week after that, we're taking out a kitchen in West Chicago. We do a lot of kitchens. People are really willing to reuse on the kitchen, which is great. So if you've got a kitchen coming up, you should reuse it. This is one neat project, the Masonic Temple in Wilmette. So this is a 1010 Central in Wilmette. And it's the old Masonic Temple from back when the Masons were a bit bigger. It's the old Masonic Temple. It went through a lot of weird lives. I never even realized that it was there growing up on the North Shore. But my brother claims that his band played there. And that would have been, he graduated high school in 91. So he claims that his band in high school played at the Masonic Temple. So maybe some other people have memories. But this was the room that we're seeing here on the left is kind of their main auditorium. They had a second auditorium upstairs. And it's pretty cool. We were hired by the developers. Developers are turning them into apartments. So again, we're seeing that opportunity where people are reusing buildings, reusing lots, and adding density to the area, which, ultimately I hope is a good thing. So he's adding apartments. I believe it's going to be made into 28 apartments. Now that seems like too many. Probably less than that, maybe 12 apartments. I think it's 4 apartments on each floor, and he's adding a floor, so probably 16. But they're going to be, very nice apartments. And they've maintained the entirety of the structure. And it was neat. We were the decon crew on this. A demo crew followed behind us who took out all of the plaster, including all of the moldings, all of the original moldings that have been removed. They took it way down to just the brick and steel structure, which was kind of wild to see. It's a different skill set than what my decon crew has. Oftentimes people compare us to demo crews because it gets to the same end, right? You need to get rid of something. But we can get rid of something, but we're going to get rid of it really differently. So my crew has the skills, the tools, the safety resources to get rid of things in a way that is safe to them, but also safe to the materials and won't damage them. Whereas demo crews have their own skill. They can get rid of a material and they can get rid of it very, very quickly, very affordably, but it is pretty much all going to go to the landfill. So that's the main difference with us. It's not so much intent, right? Demo guys are good guys. We work with a lot of them. So I don't want to demonize what they do. And the reality is that very often people are coming behind us as demo crews. We take those things that not just can be salvaged, honestly, anything can be salvaged, but we take those things that people are willing to reuse. Everything that we take, everything that we can deconstruct is all totally driven by our customer base. it can't be stored forever unless somebody's willing to reuse it. So that's where we struggle a lot. On this project, we took all of the wood floors across the multiple floors. So you can see my crew taking up wood flooring here. We took out the windows, which was really cool. Here, I'll start the video loop. Hopefully all of us have good enough Wi-Fi to kind of watch that loop in the background. But these are the actual exterior leaded, or they're not leaded, but they're cut glass windows, and they're huge. So for context, the guy on top of those stairs there, the big guy, not the one in the reflective, but up on the top right there, he's 6'6". So those windows, the overall opening is about 6 by 15. And we removed and boarded up and managed to reclaim all of these exterior windows. And there's really nothing else like them. They're here at the warehouse. If you show up, I'm happy to show them to you, or Nancy, who's on the call here. They're pretty neat. We're probably keeping them for ourselves because they're so beautiful, but we might be persuaded. So this was one situation where we were able to save windows. And part of that was because they were protected by the previous owners. They had storm windows installed over them, but mainly because they're older windows and they're built really nicely. When you install cheap windows, they're kind of cheap windows forever. But when you install really well-built things and you install them without glue, we can reuse them forever. So we took the windows, we took the floors, we took 2 organs apart. If anybody needs an organ pipe, we've got you. I think we got 15 trucks of stuff out of here without doing any structural deconstruction, which is wild. I mean, we have chandeliers for days. So deconstruction is basically coming in anytime somebody has that opportunity to salvage materials and saves them. That's the entirety of what we do. The things that really influence people the most in making their decisions, I think some folks are motivated by avoiding the landfill. So one of our big impacts is that up to 95 materials from a deconstruction project stay out of the landfill. They get returned to our community at affordable prices. Some of that is going to be recycling. Depending on the project, a lot of that is going to be recycling. For a project like the Masonic Temple, they had radiators upon radiators upon radiators. They had a floor that was entirely made up of safes. Like, seriously, they had like 20 feet of just freestanding, crazy heavy safes. No keys, no combos, just safes that were way too heavy for a crew to safely move. And there's just not much of a market anymore, right? One of the amazing things about going digital is that we've sort of eliminated the market for safes. So we worked with our metal recycler. Our metal recycler is a guy named Mario. He's an amazing guy. And he does things that we can't do. And the reality is there's not a market for safes. There's not a market for huge radiators. There's a market for smaller radiators. And we put those into the reuse market. But our larger radiators, we work with our recyclers to make sure that the highest and best use, right? I use that word a lot, that not everything can go to reuse, but what we need to be aiming for is the highest and best use. So some folks on the owner side are very heavily motivated by avoiding the landfill, by not contributing to just honestly a waste of resources. Then there are folks who are motivated by health hazards. If folks are familiar with the city of Portland, their entire deconstruction ordinance was very heavily motivated by the health hazards associated with demolition. Demolition puts particulates into the air, and our buildings, to be totally honest, have a lot of weird materials in them. Sometimes it's lead paint, sometimes it's mercury of thermostats, sometimes it's the PCBs that are in insulation. There's a lot of weird stuff in our buildings. And so Portland was really heavily motivated by that, by keeping those materials out of the airstream, keeping them out of the water stream. We do get some folks who are motivated by that, not as many yet. I'm hoping that we can do more education around building health and hope get more people motivated by that. And some folks are motivated by our job placement mission. We do work to help folks enter into a career in the building trades. It's one of the few trades available if you don't have a college degree that can actually sustain a family, both at open shops, non-union shops, as well as with union shops. And then there is a third piece that I don't put onto a slide, but a lot of folks are also motivated by the value of the materials. We do charge a fee for removing materials, and it's not free. And we are not cheaper than demolition, not by a long shot. But every donation to us, a non-cash donation, we're a 501c3. That is something that you can apply to your taxes. And when you start looking at these materials, right, when you start talking about thousands of square feet of flooring that we sell at affordable prices to our community, we sell it at $3 to $5 a square foot. If you went online and tried to buy that at commercial rates, you're talking about $7 to $12 a square foot. So the tax benefits can actually add up very, very quickly. And a lot of folks are motivated by that. And, honestly, I'll take whatever motivation gets people to save materials. So that's the long and the short of it. The warehouse is open 10 to 6 Monday through Saturday. Yeah, keep an eye on your emails. There'll be more information about our other locations that you can visit. My information is here. Please feel free to reach out. So yeah, that's deconstruction. I'm trying to think of, were there other, I'm sure people will ask if there's other big topics that I missed along the way, but yeah, there we go. Bea, do you have any Q&As for me? And I'll throw up a different video in the back.
Yes. So one was, can you repeat the name of the book about lumber in the Midwest?
Nature's Metropolis, and the author is William Cronin. He was a professor at the UW-Madison. Cronin, I think, is Cronon. I'm trying to see it. I had my copy of it here at my desk, but it looks like I took it home. Yeah, Nature's Metropolis. It's amazing. And if you're an audiobook person, I highly recommend the audiobook because it's really quite listenable. And it can be, it's like a 3-inch thick book. It can be a little bit of a slog if you try to do it all at once.
Okay, Brian asks, are there tax credits available for donors for residential deconstruction?
There are, yeah. It's not technically a tax credit. I'm showing my walkthrough on the side through that project in Winnetka that we're hoping to start. It's not technically a tax credit. Tax credits are like what they use for affordable housing, right? Where that's actually a tradable asset. Instead, what it is it's actually a donation receipt. So my understanding of it is that you can apply that donation receipt to reduce your taxable income. If it is less than $500, you don't really need to do much of anything. You can just tell the IRS, hey, I donated goods to this 501c3 organization, and it was of a value up to $500. The owner is always responsible for establishing the value. Up to $5,000, you need to give a list. So you would say, I donated this many square feet of flooring, I donated this many kitchen cabinets, and by my estimation, it's worth this much. If you are claiming a donation value of greater than $5,000, which is probably about 10% of our clients, if we look at all of our sales. So if you donate more than $5,000, you are required to hire an independent appraiser to value those materials, because it's not quite like, there's no Kelly Blue Book for what these materials are worth. An independent appraiser will come in and establish the comparable sales of materials and do a fair market value of those materials. And, for different kinds of houses, I have seen valuations of kitchens be over $20,000. Particularly here in the North Shore, there are kitchens that it can be really extraordinary. Part of it is how much the materials cost in the first place, how much they've deteriorated over time, what that includes. Does that include a Viking stove? I mean, once you start talking about a Sub-Zero fridge and a Viking stove and a Wolf range and all of these kinds of pieces, those are really expensive appliances. So I've certainly seen kitchens worth more than $20,000, or not worth, I should say, valued at more than $20,000 for tax purposes. And I've seen the materials on single family homes range anywhere from probably $50,000 to $160,000. Okay. So it's quite a significant motivation.
Okay. And what is the cost of deconstruction and deconstructing an average house?
For deconstructing an average house, it depends on what an average house is. So I would say that recently we have deconstructed a number of wood framed houses for around $70,000. What will vary about that is how big the house is, how many materials there are inside the house, how much do we have to undig, kind of how much do we have to remove in order to get at the reusable materials. So how much plaster do we need to remove? Is it drywall or is it plaster? Drywall is actually easier to remove sometimes, but it often has glue on it. Where is it located? The reality is that if you're located in Evanston and I can get to you in 5 minutes, I'm going to spend less travel time getting to your building than if it's in Lake Bluff. So it'll factor in those pieces. Then there's other utility disconnects, asbestos abatement, disconnection of sewer and water, those sorts of things. So it'll vary, but in general, we are much more expensive than demolition. Demolition for comparable properties would run you about $35,000 to $40,000. So that's just the reality. It's a different deliverable. And I'd rather be really transparent about the fact that it's a different deliverable. You get a different item at the end. Certainly in terms of how it pencils out for many owners, depending on your tax bracket, it does pencil out when you kind of look at the overall net money over multiple years. But yeah, I'm definitely not an accountant. So I can give all the information I have, but no advice.
Okay, what is the wildest thing you have ever found or seen besides what you were mentioning of the safes, for example?
Safes were just weird, but we actually encounter a lot of safes. That's like the third or fourth time I've encountered that kind of safe. What is the wildest thing I've ever encountered? I feel like I just said this on something really recently, and now I can't think of what it was.
I mean, that tree is pretty wild.
Oh, that was really cool, right? I've never seen that. That was definitely really interesting, those atriums. They're just, it's neat, right? It's a neat house. It's definitely very individual. It's very, they had a kind of public wing and a private wing. So this was, I'm walking through right now the private wing, which was the family bedrooms. And then the public wing was the other side. But yeah, it's cool. It's cool to see a family's personality come through so strongly on a building that they commissioned.
And with all these bricks, Karen asks, what determines if bricks can be reused?
Partly it's what they look like. So these bricks are Chicago Common bricks, which is actually a highly sought after brick. So it's where they came from. Are they painted or not? Are they what's called face brick? Face brick is actually much more challenging to find a buyer for. So face brick has kind of a finished face on it, and it just not as many people reuse it. It's not considered as prized. So Chicago Common is the, sorry, I'm actually talking in the back of the video. I muted myself, so that's why I'm pointing at things. Chicago Common is the most prized around here. The main determinant is often the mortar. So around the 20s, when Portland cement was invented, they changed the mortar. Mortar to hold bricks together prior to that was always a lime-based mortar. Lime is what they would use to extract the moisture from the mortar and allow it to actually act as a binder between the bricks. Around the 1920s, after Portland cement came into common use, and I mean, Portland cement is really the driver of the emissions associated with cement. Now at this point with Portland cement as the mortar is stronger than the brick.
Wow.
So what determines it is it worth the energy that we're going to put into it? If it's got lime mortar, I can just like kind of hit it with a putty knife a few times and take out the bricks. If it's got cementitious Portland cement mortar, then I have to go in with an actual hammer drill and chisel it apart. So if it's going to come out and it's going to be covered in concrete, nobody can really use it for anything. These will again work with our demo partner and have them kind of nudge it over. That power that comes from hydraulics is astonishing, and it can be really useful if you use it in the right way. So we'll have them apply a huge amount of energy and a huge amount of force in a very short period of time using a very blunt instrument. And it will help break all those bricks apart and see what we can harvest. I suspect that the bricks on the outside, these ones that I'm walking past now, are going to be more harvestable than the ones on the inside.
Okay. Mary Beth asks, the internet talks about asphalt recycling. Does that not happen in this area?
Hey, Mary Beth, how you doing? Asphalt recycling does happen. So asphalt paving is recycled at a very, very high rate. Most municipalities have internal asphalt recycling. Asphalt shingle recycling is a different game. Asphalt shingle recycling does not happen very often, no. There are some states that do a very good job of it. It's certainly possible to do. It has the same issues as any waste handling stream in that there's a lot of contaminants. So if you look at a purchase of new asphalt shingles, they're going to have sticky stuff on the back of them. They usually have what's called a nail strip on them. That's actually a piece of plastic film that's on it. So even just when you're installing it, it already has contamination. And then you install it and you're putting nails on it. And then you're installing it on top of a piece of plywood or another substrate. So at this point, I've got like 4 streams just in the installation. So when I remove it, I've got a really challenging mixed waste stream of moss, of old asphalt layers that are probably different asphalt shingle mixes. And then all the asphalt shingles have that little granular stuff on top of them that are all different colors and are all different sources. So it's a very messy stream. I know that Vermont and Connecticut do a good job of recycling it. Connecticut, because they have laws about what they can export in terms of their waste, so they've been forced to find better solutions. It can be done. They basically chop it up and melt it down. I'd say the place where you're going to find a debatable highest and best use is places that rely really heavily on incineration, because it is easiest to use as fuel. It's just, it's pure oil, right?
Yeah.
So that's where you're going to find the simplest and most effective non-landfill based disposal.
Okay. Wonderful. I think that was our last question. I
You're
did
still on
add,
time.
yeah, wonderful. I did add the Evanston Rebuilding Warehouse's website address.
Thank you.
And I guess if you want to say any final thoughts or ideas.
I would say it's my final thought and idea. Thank you so much for being here, for being engaged, and for helping to push forward the options that we have. I think the more that we push for deconstruction, the more that we use deconstruction, the more that we use reused materials. I haven't looked at the participant list again, but when I was looking at it before, I know a lot of you. So you're already shopping here. Please bring more people to shop here. So that the more that we can drive that side of the pump, right? The more that we can drive the demand side of the pump, the supply will hit it. Demo guys will do whatever is whatever they're paid to do, in all honesty. So it will happen. We can get the materials, we can save the materials, but we have to use them. And that's the harder part. And Sylvia is really leading the charge on that. That's, it won't be all of us individually, but it will happen. I do see really fruitful things happening in Europe. I do see really fruitful things happening in other states. It is happening. It's just we're like 40 years away from getting what Belgium has, but Belgium's doing it really well. There is that future. The EU building is made out of reclaimed windows, so it will happen, and we're on the right path. But we'll keep pushing. Thank you all for pushing with me.
Thank you so much, Anne.